The sun hung low in the sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the war-torn city of Varentia. The once vibrant streets, filled with laughter and life, now lay in ruins, a haunting reminder of the devastation that had unfolded. Broken buildings stood like skeletal remains, their shattered windows reflecting the harsh reality of a world steeped in chaos. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke, mingling with the faint cries of those who had lost everything. In the distance, the sound of distant explosions reverberated through the air, punctuated by the crackle of gunfire. Ethan, a soldier in his late 20s, walked cautiously through the rubble, his heart heavy with the weight of despair that surrounded him. Clad in camouflage and a worn-out military jacket, he moved with purpose but felt the tremors of fear in his gut. Each step reminded him of the lives lost and the relentless violence that engulfed his homeland. Ethan had joined the army with dreams of defending his country and protecting its people. But as the war dragged on, those dreams began to shatter like glass underfoot. He had seen too much, friends torn apart, families displaced, and innocent lives caught in the crossfire. The heroic ideals he once held on to felt like distant memories, replaced by the harsh reality of survival. As he passed by a makeshift barricade, he caught sight of a young boy, no older than 8, rummaging through the debris for scraps of food. The child's hollow cheeks and sunken eyes spoke volumes about the struggles faced by the civilians in this war. Ethan felt a pang of sorrow in his chest, a reminder that beyond the soldier's duty lay the human cost of conflict. A few blocks away, a makeshift hospital had been set up in an old school building. The sign out front, barely hanging on its hinges, read Emergency Medical Services. Inside, the air buzzed with a different kind of chaos, one of hope amidst despair. Nurses rushed about, tending to the wounded, their faces etched with fatigue yet illuminated by a fierce determination. Clara, a compassionate nurse in her mid-20s, moved swiftly between patients, her white scrubs stained with blood and dirt. Her heart raced with each new arrival, her mind juggling the responsibilities that weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had chosen this path to heal and help, believing she could make a difference, even in the darkest of times. But the toll of the war had begun to seep into her very soul, testing her resolve daily. Clara had always dreamed of being a nurse, inspired by the stories of heroism and kindness. But here, in this broken city, she confronted the brutal reality of her dreams. The hospital was filled to capacity, with wounded soldiers and civilians alike, each carrying their own story of pain and loss. Clara worked tirelessly, her hands steadied despite the chaos, driven by a fierce desire to save lives and bring comfort to those who suffered. As Ethan arrived at the hospital, he felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The sight of Clara, moving gracefully through the turmoil, caught his breath. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her blue eyes, though weary, shone with determination. In that moment, amid the chaos, something about her presence stirred a flicker of hope within him. The war had stripped away so much: homes, families, dreams, but in this moment, Ethan felt a connection, a sense of solace in the midst of destruction. Little did they know that their paths would soon intertwine in ways neither of them could foresee. As the echoes of war continued to thunder outside, inside the walls of the hospital, a different story was about to unfold, one filled with love, loss, and the relentless pursuit of hope amidst chaos. The sound of distant artillery fire faded into the background as Ethan stepped into the makeshift hospital. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptics, mingled with a hint of something more personal: fear, hope, and desperation. The building, once filled with laughter and education, was now a sanctuary for the wounded, a lifeline in a city under siege. Ethan winced as he moved through the chaos, where nurses and medics rushed past him, their faces a mix of determination and exhaustion. He had been assigned to assist with logistics, helping to transport supplies and manage the flow of patients. It was an unglamorous role, but he understood the importance of every small task. However, it was not the logistics or the work that caught his attention, it was Clara. He spotted her at the far end of the room, her brow furrowed in concentration as she expertly bandaged a soldier's arm. Her hands moved swiftly, working with a grace that seemed to defy the chaos around her. Ethan watched, captivated by her focus and the way she spoke softly to the wounded man, offering words of comfort as she worked. There was something about her presence that illuminated the darkness surrounding them, a beacon of light amid despair. As she finished with her patient, Clara glanced up and met Ethan's gaze. Her blue eyes held a warmth that momentarily pierced the gloom. He felt an inexplicable pull toward her. A connection that seemed to transcend the circumstances of their reality. With a shy smile, she acknowledged his presence, her lips curling into a gentle expression that made his heart race. "Hey there," she said, wiping her hands on her scrubs before walking over to him. "You're new here, right?" "Yeah," Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just got assigned to help out." "Good to have you here. We can always use more hands." Clara's smile widened, and for a moment, the horrors of the war outside seemed to fade away. Ethan couldn't help but admire her resilience. "I've seen how hard you all work," he said, gesturing to the chaos around them. "It's incredible what you're doing." "Thank you," Clara replied, her cheeks flushing slightly. "We're just doing our best. Everyone here deserves care, no matter what." Ethan nodded, feeling a wave of admiration wash over him. In that moment, he knew Clara was not just a nurse, she was a warrior in her own right, fighting to bring hope to the hopeless. As the day wore on, Ethan found himself drawn to her more and more. They worked side by side, moving supplies and assisting with patients. Each moment spent together deepened their connection. Clara shared stories of her life before the war. Her dreams of helping others, and her hopes for a peaceful future. In return, Ethan opened up about his reasons for joining the army, the values he held dear, and the sense of duty that drove him. Their laughter echoed softly in the hospital, a precious sound amid the cries of pain and suffering. They shared fleeting glances, lingering touches, and unspoken words that danced between them like a fragile thread, weaving their hearts together against the backdrop of chaos. Then came the moment that changed everything. The sirens wailed, signaling an imminent attack. The hospital's atmosphere shifted abruptly, filled with panic and urgency. Clara's face turned serious as she grabbed Ethan's arm. "We need to get everyone to safety," she said, her voice steady but laced with fear. They sprang into action, moving swiftly to assist the patients. Clara's calm demeanor inspired Ethan as they navigated the chaos, ensuring that everyone was accounted for. In those intense moments, their connection deepened. They worked in perfect harmony, relying on one another as the world around them threatened to collapse. As the attack began, the building shook violently, and debris rained down from above. Clara grabbed Ethan's hand, pulling him close as they sought refuge in a corner. Their hearts raced, and for a brief moment, time stood still. The fear and uncertainty outside melted away as they looked into each other's eyes, realizing they had found something precious amidst the horror, solace in each other's presence. In that chaotic moment, their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss, igniting a spark that sent electricity coursing through them. It was a kiss filled with desperation, longing, and an unspoken promise, a promise that, no matter the circumstances, they would hold on to each other amidst the storm. The sound of gunfire echoed outside, but inside the makeshift hospital, a flame of hope flickered to life. Though chaos surrounded them, Ethan and Clara had found a brief respite in each other, a light in the darkness that gave them the strength to face the trials ahead. Little did they know that this moment would set them on a path of love, sacrifice, and difficult choices in the days to come. The days turned into weeks, and the war showed no signs of abating. Yet, amid the chaos of their lives, a beautiful relationship began to blossom between Ethan and Clara. Each day brought them closer together, weaving their lives into an intricate tapestry of shared moments and tender feelings. Ethan often found himself volunteering for extra shifts at the hospital, not just to aid in the effort but to be near Clara. They shared fleeting glances over patience, exchanged shy smiles during quiet moments, and found solace in their conversations amidst the chaos. Each touch, each shared laugh felt electric, fueling a deepening bond that neither of them could deny. One evening, after a particularly harrowing day, Clara invited Ethan to the roof of the hospital. "I want to show you something," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. As they climbed the stairs, Ethan felt a mix of anticipation and curiosity. Once on the roof, they were greeted by a stunning view of the city, now dimly lit under the glow of the setting sun. The orange and pink hues painted the sky, a breathtaking contrast to the destruction below. Ethan stood in awe, absorbing the beauty before him, but his gaze quickly shifted to Clara. She looked radiant, her face illuminated by the soft light. "It's beautiful," he said, stepping closer. "I can't believe I've been missing this." Clara turned to him, her expression serious yet warm. "It's easy to forget beauty exists here, isn't it?" Ethan nodded, his heart aching for the people caught in the conflict. "Sometimes, I think we cling to these moments because they remind us of what we're fighting for." She looked at him, her blue eyes filled with understanding. "Exactly. We need to hold on to hope, even when it feels impossible." In that moment, Ethan felt a rush of emotion. Clara's words resonated deeply within him, igniting a fierce desire to protect that hope and the woman who embodied it. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "You give me hope, Clara. I didn't expect to find that here, not in the middle of all this." Clara's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked down, a smile creeping onto her lips. "I feel the same way about you." Their hearts raced in unison as Ethan reached for her hand, gently intertwining their fingers. The connection sparked between them, a palpable energy that pulled them together. The world around them faded away, leaving only the two of them standing on that rooftop. Caught in a moment that felt both fragile and eternal. "Can I tell you something?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Clara replied, her gaze steady and inviting. "I've never felt this way about anyone before," he confessed, his eyes searching hers. "You've brought light into my life when all I see is darkness. I care about you, Clara, deeply." Her breath caught, and for a moment, Ethan feared he had overstepped. But then Clara smiled, a radiant expression that lit up her face. "I care about you too, Ethan. More than I ever expected. You make me feel alive." Their eyes locked, and the connection deepened, pulling them closer until there was no space left between them. Clara leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that held all the unspoken words and emotions they had shared. It was soft yet passionate, filled with the promise of a love that blossomed in the midst of despair. As they pulled away, both breathless, Ethan looked into Clara's eyes, searching for the truth of her feelings. "Do you think we can really have something here? Amidst all this chaos?" Clara bit her lip, considering his question. "I want to believe that we can. Love doesn't just vanish because the world is falling apart. If anything, it makes us fight harder for what matters." Ethan smiled, feeling a surge of hope. "Then we'll make it work. We'll find moments for ourselves, even if they're brief." Over the following weeks, Ethan and Clara carved out stolen moments together amidst the chaos of war. They shared laughter in the hospital corridors, exchanged stories of their pasts, and dreamed of a future beyond the battlefield. Each encounter deepened their bond, and they found solace in each other's arms, comforted by the knowledge that they were not alone in their struggles. They whispered sweet promises in the dead of night, exchanging hopes and dreams that seemed too distant yet felt so close in those moments of intimacy. But the war had its own cruel way of intervening. As their love flourished, so did the dangers surrounding them. Air raids became more frequent, and the hospital faced an influx of casualties. The harsh reality of their situation weighed heavily on them, reminding them that every moment together was a treasure that could be snatched away in an instant. Yet, in the face of adversity, their love remained a bright flame, a beacon guiding them through the darkness. Ethan and Clara knew they were living on borrowed time, but in each other they found the strength to endure. Their hearts beat in unison, tethered by the fragile hope that, someday, they would emerge from the shadows of war, hand in hand, ready to embrace a brighter future. As the weeks rolled on, the relentless pace of war seeped deeper into the fabric of Ethan and Clara's lives. The initial excitement of their budding romance began to wear thin under the weight of the conflict surrounding them. The moments of laughter and tenderness they shared were increasingly overshadowed by the grim realities of their circumstances. The hospital, once a refuge, transformed into a grim battleground. Each day, the staff faced an influx of wounded soldiers and civilians, their bodies battered and broken from the violence outside. The once bright hallways were now filled with the haunting sounds of cries for help, mingled with the frantic footsteps of nurses and medics rushing to tend to the injured. The atmosphere was charged with an urgent intensity, the air thick with the scent of blood and antiseptic. Ethan had become accustomed to the chaos, but the toll it took on him was undeniable. He found himself carrying the weight of each patient's suffering on his shoulders. The faces of the wounded haunted his dreams, their pain echoing in the silence of the night. He could feel the despair creeping in, threatening to extinguish the flickering flame of hope that Clara had ignited within him. Clara, too, bore the burden of the war. She worked tirelessly, her hands often stained with blood, her heart heavy with the knowledge that many of the soldiers she treated would never return to their families. The emotional strain was evident in her tired eyes and the way her shoulders sagged under the weight of their shared grief. One afternoon, as they took a rare moment to catch their breath in a small break room, Clara leaned against the wall, her expression distant. "Do you ever feel like we're losing ourselves in all of this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan turned to her, his heart aching for her vulnerability. "I do," he admitted. "It's hard to see so much pain and keep holding on to hope." Clara nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I thought I could be strong enough to handle it all, but some days, it just feels overwhelming." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I love what I do, but I never imagined it would be like this." Ethan stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her. "You're doing incredible work, Clara. You're saving lives every day. But it's okay to feel exhausted. We can't carry the weight of the world on our shoulders alone." In that moment, they shared a quiet understanding, a recognition of the harsh truths they faced. The love they had found in each other was a lifeline, but it didn't shield them from the realities of war. It was a fragile sanctuary amid chaos. But it was becoming increasingly difficult to hold on to. As days turned into nights, the hospital became a place of relentless suffering. Ethan witnessed firsthand the toll the war took on the human spirit. Families shattered, friendships forged in the heat of battle, and lives irrevocably changed. He found himself growing increasingly frustrated, feeling helpless as he tried to support Clara while battling his own demons. One evening, after a long day, Ethan sat on the edge of his cot, staring blankly at the wall. Clara entered, her face drawn and weary. She dropped her bag onto the floor and sank into the chair across from him. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice heavy with concern. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" He sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Clara. It's just, sometimes, it feels like we're fighting a losing battle. The war is relentless, and it's taking so much from us. I'm scared that it will take you too." Clara leaned forward, her eyes filled with determination. "We can't let it consume us. We have to hold on to what we have, even if it's just a little bit of happiness. We need each other." He looked at her, the fire in her eyes igniting something within him. "You're right. I can't let fear dictate how I feel. "We found something precious, and I refuse to let this war tear us apart." As they spoke, they shared their fears and hopes, finding comfort in each other's presence. They created a small bubble of warmth in an otherwise harsh world. But reality was an ever-looming specter, and the war continued its unyielding march. Tragedy struck one fateful day when an air raid hit the hospital. The loud blasts rattled the building, sending everyone into a state of panic. The chaos was instantaneous, screams and cries filling the air as patients were thrown from their beds. And medical staff rushed to secure the wounded. Ethan and Clara sprang into action, adrenaline pumping through their veins. They worked together, guiding patients to safety, trying to keep everyone calm amidst the chaos. But the sound of explosions grew louder, reverberating in their bones, creating a sense of impending doom. In the aftermath, when the dust settled, the hospital was left with shattered windows and a sense of profound loss. The once bustling corridors were filled with debris, and the air was thick with the scent of smoke. As they assessed the damage, Ethan's heart sank when he realized how many lives had been altered in a matter of moments. That evening, as they sat in the remnants of the break room, Clara broke the heavy silence. "What if this is it, Ethan? What if we lose everything?" Ethan felt a lump in his throat, knowing the weight of her words. "We can't think like that. We have to believe we'll get through this. That we'll come out stronger on the other side." But deep down, he wondered how many more harsh realities they could withstand. The war had already taken so much from them. Would it take Clara, too? The thought gripped him with fear, but he pushed it aside, reminding himself of their love, a flicker of light amidst the encroaching darkness. In the days that followed, they faced challenges together, enduring the realities of war while finding small pockets of happiness in their stolen moments. The spark of their romance was a fierce flame, flickering but resilient against the storms of despair that threatened to engulf them. Yet, with every passing day, Ethan knew they were treading a delicate line between love and loss, a truth that would ultimately shape their destinies in the unforgiving world of war. The war raged on, unyielding and indifferent to the personal battles being fought within the confines of the hospital. Days melted into nights, and Ethan and Clara found themselves trapped in a cycle of hope and despair. The light of their love illuminated the darkness around them, but the toll of war loomed like a shadow, casting uncertainty over their future. Amidst the chaos, a decision hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. The military had announced a significant offensive that would require more personnel on the front lines. Ethan, already a soldier, was among those being called to serve. The news struck him like a thunderclap, filling him with dread and confusion. He had always known that his duty called. But now, the reality of leaving Clara behind felt like an insurmountable burden. In the days leading up to the deployment, Ethan and Clara clung to each other, desperate to savor every moment they had left together. They spent long hours in the hospital, providing care to the wounded, sharing stories that pulled them closer, and weaving dreams of a future they dared to imagine beyond the war. Yet, beneath their laughter and whispered promises, the tension of impending separation simmered, creating an unspoken heaviness between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they found themselves sitting on the roof of the hospital once again, the familiar view stretched out before them. The city below, battered but resilient, stood as a testament to survival, and for a moment, it seemed as though the chaos had receded. Clara leaned against the wall, her gaze distant. "What will happen when you leave, Ethan?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with apprehension. Ethan felt his heart tighten. "I don't know. I wish I could say everything would be okay, but the truth is, I might not come back. Or I could be gone for months." He took a deep breath, trying to mask the fear that clawed at his insides. "But I have to go. It's my duty." Tears glistened in Clara's eyes as she turned to him. "You're not just a soldier to me, Ethan. You're the one I love. The thought of you being out there, exposed to all that danger." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, fighting to maintain her composure, he reached out, taking her hand in his. "Clara, I wish things were different. I wish we could run away from all this. But I need you to understand that this is something I have to do. For both of us. For our future." The pain in her eyes was almost unbearable. "And what if your future doesn't include me? What if you don't come back?" Her voice trembled, and the fear she tried so hard to suppress spilled over. Ethan squeezed her hand, desperate to reassure her. "I will come back. I promise you that. I will do everything I can to make it back to you." But deep down, he too was haunted by doubt. The war was unpredictable, and he knew the odds were not in his favor. Yet, he couldn't let fear dictate his choices. He needed to uphold his duty, not just to himself but to those around him. "Promise me something," Clara said, her voice steadier now, but the fear still lingered beneath the surface. "Promise me that no matter what happens, you will fight for us. Fight for your life and for our love." "I promise," Ethan replied, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "I'll fight for us. But I need you to promise me something too." "Anything," she whispered. "Promise me that you'll keep living your life while I'm away. Don't wait for me, Clara. Make the most of every day. I want you to be happy, even if I'm not there to share it with you." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks as she nodded, understanding the weight of his request. "I promise I'll try. But it won't be the same without you." The air between them was thick with emotion as they leaned into each other, their lips meeting in a tender kiss. It was a kiss filled with longing and fear, a promise of love that transcended the boundaries of war. In that moment, they both understood that their lives were about to change forever. The next morning, Ethan received orders to report for deployment. As he prepared to leave, Clara clung to him, her heart breaking at the thought of being separated. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. "I know," Ethan replied, wrapping his arms around her tightly. "But remember what we promised each other. This isn't the end, it's just a chapter in our story." With a final, lingering kiss, Ethan stepped back, forcing himself to let go. Clara watched him leave, her heart aching as she stood rooted in place, tears streaming down her face. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between them felt insurmountable. Ethan faced the brutal realities of the front lines, battling both the enemy and the weight of his own fears. Each day was a test of survival, and each night he found solace in thoughts of Clara, her laughter, her touch, the dreams they had shared, but the war was unrelenting. Ethan faced harrowing situations that tested his strength and resolve. He lost comrades and watched lives shatter before his eyes. The horrors he encountered seeped into his soul, and he struggled to maintain the glimmer of hope that Clara had inspired within him. Meanwhile, Clara tried to honor her promise. She poured herself into her work at the hospital, tending to the wounded and offering comfort to those in pain. She found strength in her patients' stories, witnessing their resilience amidst suffering. Yet, every night she returned to her empty quarters, the silence felt deafening without Ethan's presence. As time passed, Clara faced her own critical choice. The war had transformed her life, forcing her to navigate the complexities of love and longing in a world torn apart by conflict. She had to decide whether to wait for Ethan or embrace life without him. Each passing day felt like an eternity, filled with uncertainty and longing, through letters and memories. They held on to their love, but the question loomed over them both: would their love withstand the trials of war, or would they be forever changed by the choices they were forced to make? The harsh realities of war weighed heavily on their hearts, pushing them toward decisions that could alter the course of their lives. The stakes were higher than ever, and as they faced their separate battles, they realized that love was not just a feeling but a choice that would define who they were in the midst of chaos. As the weeks stretched into months, the relentless grind of war began to take its toll on Ethan and Clara, pushing them to their breaking points. The horrors they had witnessed, the lives lost and shattered around them, and the constant threat of danger weighed heavily on their hearts and minds. Each letter exchanged between them, while filled with affection and hope, also carried the burden of uncertainty and fear. For Ethan, the front lines were a blur of chaos. Each day felt like a lifetime as he and his fellow soldiers fought to hold their ground against a fierce enemy. The camaraderie he shared with his comrades kept him going, but the loss of friends and the sight of young lives being extinguished left scars on his soul. The laughter that once came so easily now felt distant, replaced by the grim reality of survival. He often thought of Clara during those long days, her smile illuminating his darkest moments. But as the weight of his experiences grew heavier, he found it increasingly difficult to reach for that light. The flashes of trauma replayed in his mind, and the nightmares haunted him when he finally succumbed to sleep. The promise he made to fight for their love began to feel like an insurmountable burden. Clara, on the other hand, was grappling with her own demons back at the hospital. The influx of wounded soldiers was relentless, and with each passing day, she felt the strain of her work mounting. She poured her heart into caring for the injured, but the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. The sight of young men, once full of dreams, now lying broken and battered in her care filled her with a profound sense of loss. One evening, after a particularly harrowing day, Clara found herself alone in the break room, staring at the wall. The weight of grief threatened to crush her spirit. She picked up a pen and paper, her hands trembling as she tried to express the thoughts swirling in her mind. But the words eluded her, and frustration bubbled to the surface. Why can't I do more? She muttered to herself, tears streaming down her cheeks. Why does it feel like everything is falling apart? She felt a deep sense of helplessness and isolation, despite being surrounded by others who shared her plight. The war had forged a chasm between her and the world, and no amount of optimism could bridge that gap. Each letter from Ethan offered comfort, but they also reminded her of the fragility of life. She longed for the simple moments they had shared, the laughter that had once filled their days. As the hospital became a backdrop for suffering, Clara faced a critical decision. She had been approached by a group of aid workers who were organizing a relief effort to provide medical assistance in areas heavily affected by the war. It was an opportunity to make a difference, to use her skills where they were needed most. Yet, the thought of leaving the hospital, and risking her safety, filled her with trepidation. That evening, Clara sat on the roof, her favorite spot where she and Ethan had shared their dreams. The stars twinkled above, a stark contrast to the turmoil below. She closed her eyes, envisioning Ethan by her side. What would you do? She whispered into the night. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's mental state continued to deteriorate. The constant barrage of conflict was beginning to numb him, and he found it increasingly difficult to separate himself from the violence that surrounded him. He lost track of how many battles he had fought, each blending into the next. The faces of the fallen haunted his dreams, and the burden of survival began to morph into an insidious form of despair. One fateful night, after a particularly brutal skirmish, Ethan sat in his bunk, his hands trembling as he clutched a photo of Clara. It was a simple snapshot of her smiling face, but it felt like a lifeline to a world he desperately wanted to return to. I can't do this anymore, he confessed to a fellow soldier, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to keep going. His comrade looked at him with concern, understanding the toll that war had taken on them all. You have to hold on, Ethan. We're almost through this. Just keep fighting. But Ethan was tired of fighting. Tired of pretending that everything was okay. The weight of his choices pressed heavily on him. He thought about Clara, her strength, her kindness, and the life they had envisioned together. But how could he promise her a future when he felt so broken? Meanwhile, Clara struggled with the decision to join the relief effort. Her heart longed to make a difference, to help those suffering in the conflict-ridden areas. But what if something happened to her? What if she never saw Ethan again? The thought of being away from him, of not knowing if he was safe, gnawed at her insides. She was caught in a web of conflicting emotions, and the pressure to choose a path became almost unbearable. Finally, the night arrived when she had to make her choice. Standing in front of the hospital, her heart raced as she prepared to leave. She clutched the letters Ethan had sent her, reading his words of love and hope one last time. In that moment, she understood that her choice wasn't just about her own safety but also about honoring the love they shared. She couldn't remain stagnant while the world burned around her. She had to fight for her own sense of purpose, just as Ethan fought for survival on the front lines. Clara made her decision. She would join the relief effort, embracing the uncertainty that came with it. But she knew that every choice came with a cost. As she stepped into the vehicle that would take her away, she felt a pang of guilt for leaving the hospital and, more importantly, Ethan behind. In the days that followed, both Ethan and Clara faced their breaking points in different ways. Ethan's nightmares escalated, and the mental toll of war began to manifest in reckless behavior. He threw himself into battles, seeking to numb the pain with adrenaline. The thought of Clara became a distant memory, overshadowed by the reality of his situation. Meanwhile, Clara worked tirelessly in the relief camps, her heart full of determination. She poured her soul into helping those in need, but the emotional toll was staggering. She felt the absence of Ethan keenly, and each day spent away from him chipped away at her spirit. As they navigated the complexities of their choices, the love that had once burned so brightly between them was threatened by the realities of war. Both Ethan and Clara stood at their own breaking points, grappling with the decisions they had made and the impact those choices would have on their futures. In the heart of conflict, where chaos reigned, the fragility of their love hung in the balance, a testament to the sacrifices they were willing to make for each other, even as the world around them threatened to tear them apart. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between Ethan and Clara grew unbearable. The ache in Clara's heart was a constant reminder of the love they shared, now shadowed by the separation imposed by war. Each sunrise brought with it a fresh wave of longing, and the nights became a chorus of memories that echoed through her mind, reminding her of the warmth of Ethan's embrace. Clara immersed herself in her work at the relief camp. Surrounded by the wounded and the suffering, she threw herself into her duties, treating the injured and comforting the grieving. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on the task at hand, the thoughts of Ethan persisted. Each time a soldier entered the makeshift hospital, her heart raced, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Yet, every face was a reminder of the chaos that separated them. One evening, as Clara tended to a particularly bad case, a young soldier whispered her name. "Are you Clara? The one they say has a soldier at the front?" He asked, his voice trembling from pain and exhaustion. "Yes, I am," she replied softly, trying to remain composed. "Do you know him?" The soldier's eyes lit up with recognition. "Ethan Sullivan. He's a good man. He talks about you all the time. He says you're his light in this darkness." Clara's heart swelled at the mention of Ethan's name, a bittersweet reminder of their love. "Is he okay?" she asked, her voice catching in her throat. The soldier hesitated, his expression shifting. "He's been through a lot. He's been reckless. I think he's struggling." The weight of those words crushed Clara. She tried to mask her concern with a brave smile, but inside, a storm brewed. The thought of Ethan facing danger, his spirit wavering, filled her with dread. That night, she lay in her cot, staring at the canvas ceiling, her heart heavy with worry. Across the battlefield, Ethan was spiraling deeper into despair. The absence of Clara gnawed at him, but he refused to admit it. Instead, he threw himself into the fight, seeking a distraction from the pain of separation. The adrenaline of combat filled the void left by her absence, but it was a fleeting relief. Each night, as he lay in his bunk, he found himself haunted by the same memories, the sound of Clara's laughter, the warmth of her hand in his, One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, Ethan sat on the edge of his cot, clutching the photo of Clara. He traced her smile with his fingers, feeling a surge of emotions that left him vulnerable. The memory of their last embrace came flooding back. The taste of her kiss still fresh on his lips. He closed his eyes and imagined her beside him, the way she used to tease him about his serious nature, the way her laughter lit up the darkest corners of his heart. "I need you, Clara," he whispered into the silence. "I can't do this without you." But the war showed no mercy. The following days were a blur of battles and losses. Each encounter with the enemy chipped away at his resolve. His comrades noticed his change, how he became more reckless, charging into battle without caution. The worry in their eyes was evident, and the more they tried to pull him back, the further he pushed them away. Ethan spent his nights staring at the stars, searching for a sign from Clara. He wished he could reach out to her, to share his fears and insecurities. But the distance between them felt insurmountable, and the communication lines were erratic, with messages lost in the chaos of war. Clara, too, longed for that connection. Every day, she wrote letters to Ethan, pouring her heart into each word. She described her days at the relief camp, the faces of those she helped, and how she missed him deeply. Yet, sending those letters felt like casting messages into the void, with no guarantee they would ever reach him. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Clara sat beneath the stars, her heart aching for Ethan. She pulled out her notebook, writing him a letter as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Ethan, I miss you more than words can express. I feel lost without you. Please stay safe. You are my reason to fight through this chaos. Come back to me." As she sealed the letter, a sense of hopelessness washed over her. How could she endure this separation, knowing that each passing day could bring them closer to the unthinkable? She longed for a sign, anything to reassure her that Ethan was still fighting, still holding on. Back at the front lines, Ethan received a letter from Clara one fateful morning. The moment he opened it, he felt the weight of her words envelop him like a warm embrace. Reading her letter, his heart ached with longing, each line reminding him of the love they shared. But the joy of her words was quickly overshadowed by the news she shared, the growing despair among the soldiers, the increasing toll of war. "I can't bear the thought of you in danger, Ethan. Please promise me you'll take care of yourself," Clara wrote, her love palpable through the ink on the page. Tears filled his eyes as he read her words. "I promise, Clara," he whispered, feeling a rush of determination. "I will survive for you." Yet, the reality of war was unforgiving. Days later, during an intense skirmish, Ethan found himself in a life-or-death situation. The air was thick with smoke and chaos, and explosions rocked the ground beneath him. In that moment, everything faded away except for Clara's image in his mind. "I need to get back to you," he thought fiercely, pushing through the fear that threatened to consume him. With each step, he could hear her voice urging him on, reminding him of the love that awaited him on the other side of the conflict. But fate had other plans. In a split second, an explosion rocked the area, sending debris flying. Ethan was thrown to the ground, the world around him fading to black. As consciousness slipped away, the last thing he thought of was Clara, the light that guided him through the darkest of times. The days that followed were a blur for Clara. When she received news of an attack at Ethan's location, panic surged through her veins. She tried to remain calm, focusing on her patients, but her heart raced with worry. Every soldier that came through the door felt like a reminder of the danger Ethan faced. Each night, she lay awake, praying for his safety, clutching the photo of them together, hoping against hope that he would return to her. But the uncertainty loomed larger with each passing day, and the ache of separation morphed into a haunting longing. In the heart of war, where chaos reigned and lives hung in the balance, both Ethan and Clara found themselves facing a battle of their own, a battle against time, uncertainty, and the profound longing for each other that threatened to consume them. The war raged on, and its toll weighed heavily on both Ethan and Clara. Days bled into weeks, and the intensity of the conflict seemed to escalate with every passing moment. Reports flooded in about the increasing casualties, and the faces of the wounded grew familiar to Clara. Each patient she treated carried a story of pain and loss, reminding her of Ethan's plight at the front lines. In the makeshift hospital, Clara worked tirelessly, her heart breaking for the soldiers who came in bearing not only physical wounds but also emotional scars. Their eyes told tales of horrors witnessed and comrades lost, and Clara did her best to offer comfort. But as the war escalated, her own heart began to crack under the pressure. The nights were the hardest. Clara would lie in her cot, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Ethan was safe. She clung to his letters, the only lifeline connecting them amidst the chaos. Each letter she received was a breath of fresh air, but the gaps between them were agonizing. Every time she heard an explosion outside, her heart raced with fear, praying that it was not Ethan who was suffering. Meanwhile, Ethan fought bravely alongside his comrades. Each battle tested his limits, physically and mentally. The bond between the soldiers grew stronger as they relied on each other for support. Yet, deep down, the absence of Clara haunted him like a ghost, reminding him of what he was fighting for. One fateful day, the sound of gunfire filled the air as the battalion received orders for a major offensive. The mission was critical. They were to push back enemy lines and reclaim a strategically important town. As the soldiers geared up for battle, Ethan felt a surge of determination. "I need to survive this for Clara," he whispered to himself, his heart pounding in his chest. The night before the offensive, Ethan gathered with his fellow soldiers around a small fire. The tension in the air was palpable, and they shared stories of home, laughter mingling with the weight of uncertainty. But the stories inevitably turned dark, and the reality of war settled heavily on their shoulders. They knew that tomorrow could change everything. "Remember, no matter what happens, we fight for each other, and we fight for those we love," one soldier said, raising his canteen in a toast. Ethan's mind immediately went to Clara, and he raised his own canteen, silently vowing to return to her side. As dawn broke, the battalion moved out. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Ethan felt a mix of adrenaline and dread as they approached the enemy's position. Gunfire erupted, and chaos ensued. Smoke filled the air, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the battlefield. Ethan fought with everything he had, but amidst the chaos, a sense of hopelessness began to seep into his heart. Each step forward felt like a step away from Clara, and every explosion threatened to sever the fragile thread connecting them. Then, as they pushed deeper into enemy territory, disaster struck. An enemy sniper picked off one of Ethan's comrades, sending shockwaves through the battalion. Panic spread like wildfire. "We need to regroup," someone shouted, but confusion reigned. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He darted toward the fallen soldier, trying to drag him to safety. But just as he reached him, another shot rang out. Time seemed to slow as he turned, instinctively shielding his friend. The bullet hit Ethan squarely in the shoulder, knocking him back into the dirt. Pain exploded through him, sharp and blinding. The world around him faded, and he fell into darkness. The last thing he saw was the horrified face of his friend, and the echoes of gunfire were replaced by silence. Meanwhile, Clara felt the weight of impending doom. She was at the hospital when a group of soldiers arrived, their faces grim and weary. Her heart raced as they began to call out names. Each name felt like a dagger to her heart, and she clutched her chest, praying for Ethan's safety. When they finally mentioned his name, Clara's world came crashing down. "He's been injured in the offensive," one soldier said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "We're bringing him back." Clara's heart raced with fear and hope, a tumultuous mix of emotions. "Is he alive?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He's alive, but he needs immediate medical attention." "He took a bullet," the soldier replied, and Clara felt her breath hitch in her throat. As the hours passed, Clara prepared herself for the worst. She rushed to the makeshift triage area, her heart pounding in her chest. The sounds of chaos swirled around her, but all she could focus on was the thought of Ethan. When the medics finally wheeled him in, Clara felt her heart stop. Ethan was unconscious, blood seeping through his bandages, his face pale and drawn. She rushed to his side, her heart aching at the sight of him injured. "Ethan," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks as she took his hand in hers. He lay there, lifeless and vulnerable, and Clara felt the weight of the world crash down on her. She began to call his name, her voice shaking. "Ethan. Please wake up. I need you. I love you." As she held his hand tightly, something inside her ignited, a fierce determination to bring him back. The doctors and nurses surrounded him, working quickly to stabilize him, but Clara remained by his side, refusing to let go. Hours turned into an eternity, and Clara could feel the tension in the air. The medical staff worked tirelessly, but the uncertainty loomed large. Each passing minute felt like a lifetime, and Clara fought against the rising tide of panic within her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lead surgeon stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "He's stable for now, but he has a long road ahead. He lost a lot of blood, and we'll need to monitor him closely." Relief washed over Clara, but she knew the battle was far from over. Ethan was alive, but the war had taken its toll, both on him and their love. As she sat by his bedside, she vowed to stay with him every step of the way. No matter how painful the journey ahead would be, in that moment, she realized that the war had not only tested their love but had also brought them to the brink of a new understanding of loyalty, sacrifice, and the fragility of life. Torn asunder by the chaos of battle, their love would either shatter or emerge stronger than ever. The days blurred into a haunting cycle of uncertainty and fear as Clara remained by Ethan's side in the makeshift hospital. His condition fluctuated, and each moment spent waiting for him to wake felt like an eternity. Despite the doctor's assurances that he was stable, Clara couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at her heart. The war had stolen so much from them, and now, it threatened to take Ethan away, too. Clara sat by Ethan's bedside, her hand cradling his as she spoke to him softly. "I'm here, Ethan. You're going to get through this. You have to wake up," she pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. She recounted stories of their time together, laughing at memories that felt like distant dreams. "Remember that time we snuck away to the lake? The sun was shining, and everything felt perfect. I need those moments back. We need to make more memories." But days passed, and Ethan remained unresponsive, caught in the depths of unconsciousness. Each time Clara looked at his pale face, the weight of despair threatened to crush her spirit. The stark reality of their situation pressed heavily upon her. War had a cruel way of snuffing out hope and happiness. The hospital was a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Soldiers came in and out, some barely clinging to life, while others were wheeled away, their futures uncertain. Clara watched as families were torn apart, their hopes dashed by the cruel hand of war. She felt the deep sorrow of those around her, each lost soul a stark reminder of what could happen to Ethan. As Clara continued her vigil, she began to feel the toll of her situation. The exhaustion weighed on her, the emotional strain cutting deeper with each passing day. She longed for a sign, a flicker of hope that Ethan would return to her. But as the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, despair crept in, wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. One night, after a particularly harrowing day filled with emergencies, Clara sat alone in the dimly lit room, her heart heavy. She watched as shadows danced across the walls, a haunting reflection of her fears. The hospital was quieter now, the sounds of chaos temporarily subdued, but the stillness only amplified her anxiety. suddenly, she felt a slight squeeze on her hand. Clara's heart raced as she looked down at Ethan, her breath catching in her throat. His eyes fluttered open, the familiar blue piercing through the haze of unconsciousness. "Clara?" he whispered, his voice hoarse and weak, overwhelmed with emotion. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan. You're awake." She leaned closer, her heart swelling with relief and joy. "I was so scared. I thought I'd lost you." Ethan blinked, trying to focus on her face. "What happened?" he asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "You were injured in the battle," Clara explained, her voice shaking. "You took a bullet, but you're safe now. You're in the hospital." As he processed her words, Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to realization. Memories of the battlefield flooded back, and a shadow crossed his face. "The others. Are they okay?" he asked, concern etched into his features. Clara felt a pang of sadness. "Some didn't make it back. But you're here now, and that's what matters. We'll get through this together," she assured him, her voice steady despite the sorrow lurking beneath the surface. Ethan reached out to caress her cheek, his touch gentle but shaky. "I'm so sorry for putting you through this," he said, guilt creeping into his tone. "You shouldn't have to bear this burden alone." Clara shook her head, squeezing his hand tightly. "We're in this together, remember? You've always been my light in the darkness, and I'll be yours." In that moment, the fragility of hope blossomed within Clara's heart. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but Ethan's return ignited a flame within her, illuminating the path they would navigate together. They had survived the worst, and the prospect of healing, both physically and emotionally, brought a renewed sense of purpose to her soul. As days turned into weeks, Ethan began to recover, but the scars of war remained etched in both their hearts. Each morning, Clara would arrive at the hospital, ready to support him as he faced his own battles, the pain of his injury, the weight of loss, and the haunting memories of combat. Ethan's progress was slow, but with Clara by his side, he found strength in her unwavering presence. She became his anchor, and together, they learned to share their fears, their hopes, and their dreams amidst the chaos surrounding them. But as they embraced this fragile hope, the reality of the war loomed over them like a dark cloud. Each day brought fresh news from the front lines, new battles, new casualties, and new heartbreak. The war continued to rage, reminding them of the uncertainties of their future. Clara and Ethan found moments of peace within their storm. They cherished their time together, finding solace in quiet conversations and shared laughter. They dreamed of a world beyond the war, imagining a life filled with love and happiness. Yet, the specter of conflict remained ever present, a constant reminder that their fragile hope could be shattered at any moment. As they navigated the emotional landscape of their recovery, Clara knew that the fragility of hope could be both a blessing and a curse. It fueled their desire to fight for each other, but it also left them vulnerable to the harsh realities of war. With each passing day, they held on to that hope tightly, knowing that, despite the chaos, love could still flourish even in the darkest of times. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the war-torn landscape. Clara sat by Ethan's hospital bed, the soft light spilling into the room and illuminating his face. It had been weeks since he had awakened from the brink of despair, and each day they spent together felt like a precious gift. The scars of war were still etched deeply within them, but a newfound strength began to emerge from the shadows of their past. Ethan's recovery was ongoing, but with Clara's unwavering support, he found the will to face each challenge. As he progressed through physical therapy, he often caught Clara's eye, and a sense of gratitude washed over him. Her love had been his lifeline amidst the chaos. And now he was determined to reclaim his life, not just for himself, but for the two of them. Clara watched as Ethan took his first steps after the injury, each movement a testament to his resilience. The room filled with the sound of his labored breaths, but each step brought a spark of hope that illuminated the darkness they had both endured. "You're doing it, Ethan. One step at a time." Clara cheered, her heart swelling with pride. After weeks of grueling therapy and countless struggles, Ethan took a deep breath and stood tall. "I couldn't have done this without you, Clara. You've been my strength," he said, his voice steady, filled with gratitude. She beamed at him, tears glistening in her eyes. But even as they celebrated these small victories, the war outside raged on, a constant reminder of the uncertainty that surrounded them. The hospital buzzed with the arrival of new wounded soldiers, and Clara knew that the fight was far from over. The realities of the conflict pressed heavily on her mind, but she refused to let fear cloud her spirit. Instead, she focused on the love that had blossomed in the ashes of despair. As the days turned into weeks, Clara and Ethan made plans for the future, a flicker of hope igniting within them. They envisioned a life beyond the war, dreams of a peaceful home, shared laughter, and moments of joy. The thought of a future together fueled their determination to heal, to rise above the chaos that had once consumed them. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Clara sat beside Ethan on the hospital terrace. They watched as the day surrendered to night, the darkness giving way to a brilliant display of stars. It was a moment of stillness amidst the chaos, a reminder of the beauty that still existed in the world. "Do you think we'll ever find peace?" Ethan asked. His voice barely above a whisper, filled with both hope and uncertainty. Clara turned to him, her eyes shimmering with resolve. "We will, Ethan. We just have to hold on to each other and keep fighting for the life we want. The dawn will come, even after the darkest nights." With those words, they found solace in one another's arms, embracing the warmth of their love against the chill of uncertainty. They had faced the depths of despair, yet together they had emerged stronger, their bond fortified by the trials they had endured. As they stood together, a new dawn began to break on the horizon, casting light on the path ahead. The world outside remained tumultuous, but within Clara and Ethan burned a flame of hope that could not be extinguished. They were determined to forge a future built on love, resilience, and the promise of a new beginning. In the days to come, Clara would continue her work as a nurse, bringing care and compassion to those in need. Ethan, too, was ready to return to the fight, not just as a soldier but as a beacon of hope for his comrades. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that their love could withstand the trials of war. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the window, Clara and Ethan stood side by side, ready to embrace the day. The world may have been scarred by conflict, but their hearts remained unbroken, filled with the promise of new beginnings. The dawn of a new chapter had arrived, and with it, the chance to heal, to love, and to reclaim their lives amidst the remnants of war. In that moment, they realized that even in the darkest of times, hope could bloom, and love could rise anew. The journey ahead would be challenging, but they were determined to face it together, hand in hand, their spirits intertwined like the dawn breaking over the horizon, a testament to their enduring love and the fragility of hope that had brought them through the storm.
Please like this video and subscribe the channel and click on bell icon.